I'm wondering if you could briefly explain what Incode is and does.
Yeah. So my name is Ricardo Amper. I'm founder and CEO of Incode, and we're an identity verification company. We were born with AI at the core. So we started 2015 developing technology that no one had at the time. We never believed on having a person in the loop. We thought the best way to validate someone's identity is through AI, and we've taken that approach. And we raised a lot of money, 250
Mm-hmm.
million, great
Mm-hmm.
investors. We have the three biggest digital banks. We have some of the world's biggest traditional banks. We have a number of fintechs and marketplaces, etc. So what makes us different is not just the quality of the AI, quality of the prediction, but because we do the hard work. We go and partner with governments around the world, in the US and Latin America mainly,
Mm-hmm.
and we work with them to create services that can go from being a probabilistic company, just using AI to guess what the identity is, to go to the game where we can know what the identity is. And so happy to talk about that.
Yeah, gladly. I'd love to hear sort of what insights you actually generate through government partnership versus through a more private sector approach.
Yeah, so in general, identity should have been government's job, right? But you see, the U.S. is extremely decentralized. There's never going to be a central identity. And good, we have the freedom for self-determination at the state
Mm-hmm.
level. But what we're building is a network where we work closely with the state governments to be able to put our technological stack where the identity is. And so imagine an experience where, if to validate your identity, instead of having to answer questions about what was your last car, that or social, which has been hacked and it's everywhere,
Mm-hmm.
or having just to scan an ID and trying to figure out if it's fake or not fake, which is almost impossible with really good fake IDs from China. What we do is we partner with the government. You scan a driver license, you scan the face, we convert that in vectors, so it's non-identifiable. We send that to our servers inside the DNV's firewalls, and there we compare the data of the driver license, your face, versus the database. And so we are launching this service next year, and it's going from a guessing game into the knowing game, and the effectiveness is out of this roof. We did first that in Latin America in two countries,
Mm-hmm.
and we reduced identity theft by 99.6%. So it's going to be one of the biggest change in identity that is going to give a lot of access to financial services to people who need it the most.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. I'd love to hear partially about the sort of technological or sort of cybersecurity component of this,
Sure.
because it is partially contingent upon something like the DMV having a robust firewall.
Yeah.
So, how much of your work with government actors hinges upon sort of their sort of hygiene practices or what have you,
Right.
versus you also having a more modern sort of tech stack yourself?
Yeah. So look, every my learning is that DNVs are a lot more technological and sophisticated than we think,
Hmm.
which was surprising, but it is true. It's one of the hardest, working public servers that I found. Your photo of your driver license is already in their database, right? And they have different levels of security that I really can't talk to. But what we do is we created AI that could help you take a driver license and be able to read it. You would be surprised at how just about 60% of IDs can be read with phones. We read about 90% of the IDs. We developed liveness detection, which is this a real person?
Mm-hmm.
Focusing not just on this real person, focusing on the deepfakes and all these attacks that Gen AI is coming to verify that you're really a person and we can read all the documents.
Right.
And the most interesting thing is your photo stays in your phone. We just convert it in vectors. If people take it, they can't do anything with that. Goes through the firewall of the DNVs into our servers, and then we compare
Right.
that information versus the information that the DNV has. So I would say, from a security perspective, it's probably the safest identity verification experience much safer than putting your social security number,
Mm-hmm.
or telling what was your latest car or home, which is really how it's done in this country.
Right, right, absolutely. One thing I've been sort of hearing more about is the rise of synthetic fraud, but I'm
Yes.
also hearing a lot more about the rise in first party
Sure.
fraud. So I'm wondering, you know, yes, there's a concern about deep fakes, but how much does an ID verification system combat against someone whose ID has been verified going and,
Yeah.
committing fraudulent activity
Exactly.
regardless?
I think it's an incentives problem. I think the reason why first party fraud has been so big is everything became digital, particularly after COVID,
Mm-hmm.
and it became extremely easy to essentially defraud credit card companies or loan companies. And the goal is to be able to tie your real world identity, right, with systems like the one I just described
Mm-hmm.
to the transaction at the
Right,
transaction level.
right.
Actually, for example, tomorrow I'm giving a talk about how you can actually secure that transaction by, for example, going into a website. You're about to shop, and instead of just having to remember your password for your bank account, or having to get a text, which is not very secure. Those are not secure methods, and it's very easy to do that first party fraud.
Mm-hmm.
Is you tie it to your identity verification with your face or with your digital credential that you have on your phone,
Right.
and then it's extremely difficult. You create an incentive that is that reduces the fraud dramatically.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Understood. I have two more questions.
Sure.
One is quite a few incumbents are moving into the ID verification space as well.
Yes.
I know, for example, Mastercard has a
Yes.
solution, um, but they're leveraging sort of their existing network of card holders and merchants that they work with to sort
Sure.
of build out that infrastructure. So I'm wondering sort of how you respond to that sort of existing scale. Is it primarily through these government partnerships, or is it something else?
Uh, for credit card companies, it's extremely difficult because they're just the rails, right? And it's really a transaction between the person buying, the merchant, and the issuer. So it's very difficult because for Mastercard or Visa to be very successful in this, you have to make sure everybody's in the same protocol. You have to make sure that the banks go and enroll, and it's something that they've tried for a very long time, and it's really not working. We think that the U.S. is on a brink of a major shift, where not only you're going to have the deterministic approach to identity, but you're going to have an identity that you can reuse, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just think about how many KYC onboardings you have to do through your life,
Right.
how many times you have to give your social, have to give your information out. Instead of having a few providers that create a digital version of your identity, and just with biometrics you're able to attest to your identity as opposed to give data all the time or go through a very lengthy process. So I
Right.
think the world, and particularly in the US, is going in the sense where you have these great payment rails, which is Visa, MasterCard, Amex, Discover,
Mm-hmm.
and then you're going to have two or three players which are going to give you a digital ID. We have something called Incode ID
Yeah.
that does that, and in partnership with them, that's how we're going to solve it. And it's not just on that; it's also an age verification. It's an issue in this country. You want to make sure that people playing or kids playing in kids games like Roblox and things like that
Right.
are actually kids. And you also want to make sure that adults, which are interacting with tobacco, the adult industry, are just adults. And so how do you actually take identity and be able to verify a portion of your identity, which is your age, in
Mm-hmm.
a way that you feel comfortable? I think that's a big challenge, and that's where reusable identity comes to play.
Understood. Understood. Um, my last sort of full question is surrounding privacy concerns,
Sure.
especially biometrics. Um, like you mentioned, the U.S. doesn't have a centralized government database.
Sure.
There's a lot of concern around independence, and I mean, a lot more in addition to that. But you know, how much do you anticipate consumers being willing to hand over, pretty sensitive data to a company that you know they don't really have any reason to
To
trust?
try. I think the best way to see is look at the status quo. Now, how many times do you have to put your social in credit card applications, loans? How many times you have to give your information, insurance, all that in your life? It's many. So you're already giving it to a whole lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
So, and you're giving in the open, where if that information is stolen, that information can be directly used, right? That's what
Yeah.
exists now.
Yeah.
So what Incode, for example, is proposing is, you verify with vectors. You verify with something. It's equivalent to tokens in credit card.
Right.
You verify with a token like vector, where you give that information. That information is vectorized. It doesn't matter if it's stolen. Nothing you can do with it.
Mm-hmm.
With that vector, you're able to transact and prove your whole identity or parts of your identity. And the amount of traction we're having, for example, on our digital identity called Incode ID, is in the tens of millions, where Americans are saying, yes, I prefer to trust on 2 or 3 companies, but
Right.
it just stays there. I have control. I can delete my account. I can know how it was used.
Right.
It's privacy first, as opposed to methods that were invented where hackers didn't really exist,
Right.
and when privacy laws were inexistent as well.
Right. Right. Antiquated cybersecurity
Very
protocols or what
antiquated.
have you. Yeah.
Yes. So I would say it's a lot safer.
Mm-hmm.
It's privacy centric, and what we're going to see, in the next 3 years, we're going to see a lot of fraud with all these
Mm-hmm.
Gen I tools. But at the same time, we're going to see these systems like the ones we're pushing, where you have Incode is pushing deterministic view plus a reusable identity.
Mm-hmm.
That is going to change the way you do it. And so all the fintech companies that we're seeing in this show are going to be able to worry about, credit risk and other types
Mm-hmm.
of risk, but not identity risk.
Yeah.
That is going to be something that is going to be solved in the next 10 years.
Right. Understood. My last question is
Sure.
whether there are any questions I haven't asked that you feel like I should have.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would say is 2 things. First, when people think about identity fraud, they think about money stolen.
Sure.
And you can see that, yes, on the PPP program, it's
Mm-hmm.
billions of
Mm-hmm.
dollars because people fake their identity. And you can see that, financial services. But what they steal is they steal access, right? Because of these things, then people who have the least in this country, whether they're immigrants or just people who are very poor and they don't transact as much in the credit bureaus, they essentially get blocked because of all the fraud that existed from accessing the services. So that's why our mission is to power a world of trust, meaning how do you give trust through technology that makes identity theft extremely difficult. So what I would say is we think this is a problem of wheels because there's no credit bureau.
Right.
But this approach where we partner with governments, we partner with private companies, and without sharing information, all with the consent of users, we can actually eliminate identity fraud. And I'm very excited about that.
Great. Well, thank you, Ricardo. It's been a
Thank you so
pleasure.
much for the interview.
Yeah.